Welcome to Sports Spectrum, the sports and faith podcast that brings Jesus back into the conversation. Here's your host, Jason Romano.
This episode of Sports Spectrum's podcast with David Baker is brought to you by Compassion International, the most trusted child development ministry in the world. For more information about how you can help release a child from poverty, check out the website compassion.com/sportsspectrum. Compassion.com/sportsspectrum. It's $38 a month, tax deductible, and it's you having the opportunity to release a child from poverty by sponsoring them through Compassion. Check out the website. You'll see a list of children there, compassion.com/sportsspectrum, and pray about sponsoring a child today. Really excited to welcome David Baker, the president and CEO of the Pro Football Hall of Fame, joining us today on Sports Spectrum. And I'm a football junkie. I'm a historical football junkie. I feel like Rain Man sometimes when people ask me football questions about the history of the game, because when I was a kid and into my high school years and early college, that was my Bible. That was my studies, was watching and studying and reading about the history of pro football. So it's a real treat for me to be able to talk to David Baker, who is the president and CEO of the Pro Football Hall of Fame. He's the gentle giant. He's a large man, and you'll know this guy if you watch pro football, especially during the playoffs. He's the guy that gets to knock on the door and tell the pro football nominees for the Hall of Fame that they get to make it to Canton and are in to the Pro Football Hall of Fame. So that's David Baker's job. It's the best job, in my opinion, in sports, is to see David Baker knocking on a door and telling you that you're in the Hall of Fame. But just this past year, they did something a little different too with the inductions, or I guess the announcements, of coaches Bill Cowher, the longtime Steelers coach, and Jimmy Johnson, the longtime Dallas Cowboys and Miami Dolphins coach, three-time Super Bowl champion. When David Baker showed up on the set of the CBS broadcast, CBS Sports, and on Fox Sports' broadcast to surprise Bill Cowher and Jimmy Johnson and tell them that they were going to Canton and were going to be a part of the Pro Football Hall of Fame as inductees. David Baker has the best job, I think, in sports, and we're grateful that he's going to join us here on Sports Spectrum to not only talk about the Pro Football Hall of Fame, but to talk about the Hall of Fame of life, which is heaven, and he talks about his faith in Jesus Christ. This is a great conversation. David Baker joining us here on Sports Spectrum. Take a listen. David, welcome to Sports Spectrum.
Hey, Jason, great to be with you. Appreciate all you do for the game.
Thank you so much. Great to have you here on Sports Spectrum. Excited to tell your story a little bit. To me, you have the greatest job in the world, David. When I watch what you get to do, especially around this time of year as the Hall of Fame nominees and inductees were just announced, everybody wants to see you, and they're sad when you don't come knocking. To me, that's like the greatest job in the world.
You know what? Every football fan should have this job because it is dealing with the best that ever played this game. But even more so, I think with our staff here and what we do at the Hall of Fame, we like to think of ourselves as the guardians of the game. You know, the spirit that makes up these games, the values that make up this game. Our mission here at the Pro Football Hall of Fame is to honor the great heroes of the game, to preserve its history, to promote its values, and to celebrate excellence everywhere. But it's more than the worship of football heroes, because none of these guys fell out of bed great, and we don't ourselves pretend to be great or perfect by any means. But it is about kind of overcoming obstacles and challenges and adversity and being the huddle with other people who you sacrifice for, like your family. And if we can use these guys as an example of overcoming adversity and dragging a whole lot of other people to greatness, well, then maybe there's a message in there for us of how to be a better teacher or preacher or better dad, better mom, maybe a better community, and maybe a better country. So we think of the Pro Football Hall of Fame here, our staff, as the Church of Football, and it's where we spend a lot of our Sundays, watching the NFL. But we think that there's a lot of values in it too.
Oh, I completely agree. I've been fortunate now to go to the Pro Football Hall of Fame twice. We went, I think, back in 2016 when we were out for a guy weekend in Cleveland, and then went over to Canton to see the Hall. And it's just a fabulous place to go visit. Such an awesome experience. And if you're a football fan or a football junkie like I am, man, that's the history of the game right there. And it's such an awesome place to go. When you get that knock, and when you knock on that door and you get that reaction, and I think it was Steve Atwater was one this past year that I saw where he was just so emotional. What's that like when you're knocking on that door and the guy who knows that knock, when they hear David Baker's knock and they come out and you just get to experience that jubilation in that moment with one of those guys?
Well, I try to knock loud enough so that they don't think it's the turn down service or the mini bar.
That's right.
That needs to be refreshed. But I'll tell you, for me, we went on this journey of trying to show the fans what it's like when they get noticed that they're coming to Canton and going into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. And part of it was the knock on the door. This year we had the unique opportunity of two coaches that were going in, and one was on the CBS studio for the Saturday game in the divisional playoffs, and the other one was in L.A., the first having been in New York, on Sunday, so that fans could see it. And we really wanted fans to see how much it meant to them. Because when you knock on that door, I really try to tell them three things. And my job is pretty simple. Thanks for all you've done for the game. You're going to go to Canton. Not just the Pro Football Hall of Fame, but Canton has become this place that's synonymous with excellence. And then thirdly, at the Pro Football Hall of Fame, we're going to guard your legacy, and we're going to tell your story, forever. That bust is supposed to last 40,000 years. And the guy that has my job 1,000 Dave Bakers from now will be telling that story, in your case that you mentioned, of Steve Atwater. And hopefully not just his statistics, but the adversity that he overcame and the challenges that he had, and how he really, really fought to become great and bring others to a place of greatness. But I'll tell you, when I knock on that door, at first they're real excited,
right,
and they're screaming and yelling sometimes. But pretty quickly, as I share that with them, it transitions into not their trophies or their records, or it's not even about them, to be quite honest with you. In terms of what I see in their eyes, all of a sudden it becomes about all the other people that got them there. It's about the mom that drove them to practice when they were 10 years old, or the dad that wouldn't let them quit in high school, or the coach that inspired them in college. And it's about, you get to see them about other people. Jimmy Johnson, I'll tell you, Jimmy is a guy who is not often at a loss of words.
Yeah.
But when I walked on that desk at Fox, he couldn't talk. He couldn't breathe. And I know, I'll bet you anything that he was thinking about his mom. And the teammates and the coaches and even the fans that cheered you on to get you there. And so in the blink of an eye, it's almost like they have all these pictures of that journey that come together at that moment. And I think that's what we have had an opportunity to bring to them. We were constantly looking for better ways to do it. But for fans to see that, they may not, a fan may not have a bronze bust or a gold jacket or a Hall of Fame ring of excellence, but we all make that journey.
Yeah.
We all have those kind of people in our life. And I think it's something that they can identify with, because again, each one of these guys, they struggled to get there. They wondered if they were going to have somebody, say to them, "Well done, good and faithful servant.
Yeah.
You did a great job." And whether it's God telling us that in heaven, or just a coach patting us on the back saying, "Hey, good job, son," it means a lot to us. Yeah. And I've seen it. I hope I never embarrass him, but one of the guys I got a lot of respect for is Randy Moss. Randy went through a lot of emotional issues in life, and boy, there were a lot of people grabbing at him. And I have watched him, in my mind, become a real man. And he, all of a sudden, instead of about him, he went to it was about all the people of West Virginia.
Yeah.
That gold jacket belonged to all those people in West Virginia. It wasn't just about his kids. He had lost a brother, and now he's raising his brother's kids. And to me, that's the transition that you get to see in a blink of a moment. Mm. And yes, these guys are special because we watched them on TV, but that same blink of a moment happens for all of us in our own life.
We'll get back to our conversation with David Baker, President and CEO of the Pro Football Hall of Fame, in just a moment, but want to tell you about our friends, Compassion International. They've been sponsors and partners with us here for the last few years at Sports Spectrum. We love having them as sponsors, not just because they support our ministry, but we support their ministry because of what they do and what they're about. We're talking about 7,000 church partners in 25 countries, Christ-centered, releasing children from poverty. Doesn't get any more important than releasing children across the world from poverty. Compassion International does just that. They found, like I said, that the most effective way to care for children in need is through the local church. And that's why they partner with more than 7,000 churches, 25 countries, delivering God's loving care to children in need, one child at a time. And today, more than 2 million children are breaking the cycle of poverty for good because Compassion International has presented a way out. And you get NFL players like Nate Solder from the New York Giants. You get former NFL players like DeBrickashaw Ferguson and his wife Kirsten, all in on what Compassion is about, and we're all in as well. And we'd love to have you be all in on what Compassion International stands for. And simply that's by sponsoring a child. You can do that right now by going to the website, compassion.com/sportsspectrum. Compassion.com/sportsspectrum, $38 a month, tax deductible, releasing a child from poverty, bringing a child hope. Consider sponsoring a child today through Compassion International. Again, the website, compassion.com/sportsspectrum, and pray about releasing a child from poverty in Jesus' name. Now back to our conversation with David Baker, President and CEO of the Pro Football Hall of Fame, here on Sports Spectrum. David, let's intersect this conversation, as we always do on this show, with faith. You've mentioned a little bit about faith, but let's talk about your journey a little bit. We know faith is important to you. Can you tell us about that walk with the Lord and its meaning for you?
Well, let me tell you, I want to be very careful for your listeners because I am not I am a follower of Jesus Christ to the best of my ability, not because I'm a good guy, but because I'm not.
Right.
And principally because I'm saved by the grace of Jesus Christ that covers all my sin. Because I couldn't be there. If the standard, as it is, I believe, to get to heaven, is that you've got to complete every pass on every run. You got to make a touchdown. You can never fumble. You can't miss a tackle. I mean, you've got to be absolute. You've got to not only play the perfect game, you've got to play the perfect season. You've got to play the perfect life.
Yeah.
Man, I'm not that guy. But even more so, again, one of the things I love about our Hall of Famers is they're real people. Not one of our quarterbacks made it here without, throwing a lot of interceptions. Brett Favre, I believe, may hold the record still for the most interceptions.
Yeah.
And he's one of the greatest, 100 quarterbacks, or 100 players ever. Not one of these guys receivers didn't drop a pass, or running backs fumble a ball, or defenders miss a tackle, or offensive linemen miss a block. And it wasn't just in their football career. It's been in our marriages and in our jobs and in our ethics. None of us are perfect. And boy, I want to let you know Dave Baker isn't either. But I think that there was someone who was in my own life in terms of Jesus Christ, and that covers a multitude of my sins. So faith for me has been a constant struggle, and it's been, I like this concept of huddling up. I have, for a lot of us who are in the business of football, churches are difficult because we're busy on Sundays. But I've always had some other Christian guys, one of whom I lost just 2 days ago, good friend named Ron Hostry. But, for a while I was in a Bible study with 8 guys for 8 years. And then we split up into 2 groups, and 4 of us went on for another 12 years. So 4 of those guys I was with for 20 years before coming to the Pro Football Hall of Fame. And now I've got another group of guys that I meet with, a little less frequently, but we meet every 3 or 4 weeks. And we kind of try to take tabs of each other. But I think, life is hard. Life is tough. And having a team to go through it with is a real benefit. So for me, the truth that is in the Bible, that I, again, am not, can't say that I perfectly followed in my life, but I'll tell you, it's a wonderful roadmap. When you're in the game of football, you need a coach, you need a game plan, and I think the Bible is a great game plan if somebody's been here, and I think God can be a great coach, and you also need some teammates. And having some other people who have the same values, who want to try to live the life same way, who can help keep us accountable, or very importantly, pick us up when we fall, has been very, very valuable to me.
How has that faith evolved for you, David? And I love how you say that, you're not perfect. And if any of us are perfect, man, raise your hand, because that's the whole point, I think, in understanding the gospel is we can never be perfect. And that's why we need Jesus, because he is the perfect, Son of God. But tell me about how that's evolved for you. I know you, and actually met you briefly when I worked at ESPN, and you were with the Arena League, and you were the commissioner there from 1997 to 2008. Maybe just how your faith has evolved for you over these years, especially to where you are now, and being in your mid to late 60s, and just understanding who God is and what he's meant to you in your life.
Well, again, Jason, let me put it a different way. I mentioned these guys that I was with in a Bible study for 20 years, and it was every week. And we went through a lot of stuff together. I mean, there were guys in that group who lost children. There were guys who, during the recession, lost their homes and their businesses. And, there was a lot of transitions for us at different times. But I'll tell you, Jason, at one point in time, we actually thought about stopping the Bible studies and our time together, because it was always the answer was always the same.
Yeah.
Either that it was because Jesus Christ has forgiven us, or because the answer's in the Bible, or just have faith, you'll get through this. And there were probably about, to be quite honest with you, 4 or 5 answers, and every time it came up with the same answer, and the guy said, we kind of got this down. But we decided to go forward because it wasn't the answer that was the challenge. It was the application of the answer. How do we apply that to our everyday life?
Yeah.
And so for me, it's, there's still hard people in my life, and there's still sin in my life, and there's still challenges. But I tell you, I try to understand that I'm forgiven. I try to understand a little bit more patience with other people. I try to spend more time in prayer than worrying about it. I try to find that answer in the Bible, and I try to hang with people who either I can encourage or they can encourage me, because there's a whole lot of people out there in a digital world
yeah.
that've got a lot to say, and the more I just listen to that, the more distracted I get. To me, it is a journey. It's a journey of faith, and faith is challenging. But to me, again, this game that we honor here at the Pro Football Hall of Fame is kind of a wonderful metaphor for life.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, to me, and maybe it's my perspective of it, Jason, but I think there's a lot of parallels to Scripture, to be honest with you. It is an incredibly complex game that requires a whole lot of people. In an NFL game, there's 106 players on both teams. There's all kinds of officials, and there's chain crews and everything else, and everybody's got a different job, and everybody's got to be accountable. And when somebody fails at their job, somebody else has got to cover it. Bill Curry, the great Bill Curry, says that it's the only sport where every player needs every teammate on every play just to survive.
Yeah.
But, life is like that, too. Families are like that. Businesses are like that. We need each other. So the concept of huddling up just like Christ did with his 12 disciples, one of whom, by the way, failed him, betrayed him.
Yeah.
Okay, so not all those guys are perfect, but huddle up with those people to be one heartbeat, so that when you break that huddle, you can face that adversity on the other side. And if you score, you celebrate together, and if you don't, you huddle up again.
Yep.
If you're thrown for a loss or you fumble, you're going to huddle up again. And by the way, that's only one play, and one play is of one quarter, and 4 quarters makes a game. And that game, in the NFL, it takes 16 of them to make a season, and it takes a whole lot of them to make a life. But it is about competing. It's about living a life of faith, of knowing that there's some other people there that you can trust.
Yeah.
So for me, I know that there's a lot of doctrinal issues out there between Methodist and Baptist, and and even more so as you get to other great religions. But I think this concept of faith and having some fight in you is pretty cool. The greatest games I ever participated in were ones when I had nothing left when it was over. Every bit of my energy had been spent. Everything I had, I literally left on the field. If you remember that wonderful, wonderful photo of Kellen Winslow being carried off of a field of a Miami Dolphin game, where he was dehydrated, and I don't know, he had something like 16 receptions.
Yeah.
But isn't that the way you want to finish life?
Yep.
That you've given all you could to your kids and to your friends and to, your life's purpose. And so I think that there's a lot of symmetry here. And football isn't the great issue of, is Jesus Christ the Son of God? Did he die on the cross, and then did he take our sins upon us and rise from the grave? That's for me to decide. That's for each one of your listeners to decide.
Right.
But I'll tell you, there's a lot of similarities in learning how to love someone, how to persevere, how to be committed. And I'll tell you, I have seen it when our Hall of Famers come together in enshrinement. There's a thing called the Ray Nitschke Luncheon, and I don't get to go in there. You got to have a gold jacket to go in there. Only gold jackets are in that room. But I've stood at the door and watched those guys in there celebrate. And there is a love for each other. There's a fellowship for each other. And in a couple days here, I'm going to be speaking in Dallas at the funeral of my friend who was in that group. And someday when I get to heaven, we're going to have that same feeling together.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way to look at it. He is David Baker, President and CEO of the Pro Football Hall of Fame. David, thanks so much for your time, for your generosity and sharing your story with us, and continue best wishes and keep doing what you're doing. The Pro Football Hall of Fame and all that's going on there is just a fantastic facility and a great place. And as a football junkie, like I said, I love it and I can't get enough of it. So thanks again for sharing your story here on Sports Spectrum.
Jason, thanks for what you're doing for the game. And for a Hall of Fame that'll last even longer than ours here at the Pro Football Hall of Fame. It'll last for all eternity. But thank you. Hope to see you in Canton soon.
Many thanks to David Baker, President and CEO of the Pro Football Hall of Fame. What a great storyteller. What a gentle giant of a man who you can tell loves his job, loves what he gets to do, and also loves Jesus. And I love the metaphors and the way that he looked at football and saw the game of life, the game of faith. And it's not a game, but he saw football and saw faith in Jesus in the way that football presents itself. I love the comparison to being in a huddle with your team. You can't do this without others, which is so true in our walk with Jesus. You cannot do anything alone. It's just such a great way to explain faith through the game of football. David Baker was our guest here, and we really appreciate him for joining us on Sports Spectrum. Many thanks to David. Many thanks to you for listening. You can reach us on our social media pages, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. You can also hit us up on our YouTube channel and subscribe there. And of course, every single on-demand podcast of Sports Spectrum is available everywhere podcasts are found, whether it's Apple, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify, iHeartRadio. Sports Spectrum's podcast is available at any point to listen to on demand everywhere podcasts are found. And lastly, all of our content can be found at our website, sort of the home base for Sports Spectrum, over at sportsspectrum.com. Lots of content every day, articles, daily devotionals, every podcast, increase articles, first-person stories from the athletes themselves. You can find it all over at sportsspectrum.com. Thanks to our sponsors, Compassion International. You can check out the website, compassion.com/sportsspectrum, to find out more about the great work they're doing, releasing children from poverty. And thanks to you for listening. My name's Jason Romano. We really do appreciate you tuning in, and we'll see you next time right here on Sports Spectrum. I hope you all have a great rest of your day.